Greetings, one and all. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. If this is your first time on our channel, please take time to like and subscribe. If you're returning, welcome back. Today is the 24th of February 2018, and I had a couple of different directions I wanted our podcast to go in today, but the Model 3 is in, and I kind of feel like a proud uncle where I don't own the Model 3. It belongs to one of my good buddies, and with his help, I have one on order. But I thought that it made sense to possibly go through the first 3 days of things that we've learned about the Model 3 that haven't been covered previously that I think are interesting for those who might be inclined to own. Now, this is strange because I'm wondering how come we're not seeing any folks as part of our group. We're finally seeing some people show up. Great. So what I wanted to chat with you about today is the fact that at this point, my buddy's number is around 4,800 on the Model 3, and there are some goods and bads that are being worked out by Tesla with the vehicle. So I wanted to kind of go through the list. He just gave up a Model S, an S60. He shared that the reasons why he gave up the Model S were, number one, it was, I guess, 5 years old. He had 77,000 miles on it. He was offered $23K for it by Tesla and was able to sell it for $33K within 3 days, or excuse me, 6 days. So it kind of shows you the discount you take if you choose to sell your vehicle to Tesla, etc. I'll probably acknowledge a few of you on the hello. I appreciate the hi from all of you, but it gives us a chance to dive into some more substantive stuff in 20 minutes if I don't say hello, but I can see all of your hellos and I appreciate your joining me. Now, the first thing that I thought was funny that popped up was that I reviewed with him the fact of, I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was somebody who had a head-on collision with their Model 3, and they ended up unable to open the glove box because the screen had shattered. So when I mentioned this to him, he specifically went over what the story was with the glove box with the Tesla representative at the factory. And after doing so, he then went online and I guess went in the manual, and finally took him 10 minutes to figure out how to open the glove box using the screen. And interestingly, afterwards, I asked him, do you remember how to do it? And he's like, well, offhand, I don't, but I can figure it out later. And this is a PhD mechanical engineering, by the way, that's having difficulties with opening her glove box. So I think the changes Elon talked about make sense. I think it definitely makes sense to have a button on the screen to address this. So to address further what we were talking about is the fact that one of my closest buddies from Stanford just got his Model 3, and we're kind of working through things that he's learned, likes and dislikes. So let me do a quick list of items covered and then choose the ones I want to dive into. So we covered, for example, the Aero wheels give you 10% better mileage. He thought that when you viewed them by picture, they look kind of cool, or they look kind of quirky, and he may not want to have them on, but he thought they looked a lot better in person. The wheels are kind of a big deal because you actually have a situation where it's kind of critical that you have the extra 10% because Tesla recommends that you not charge more than 90% on your battery. So I've got to lean over here. Not getting cooperation from my phone a little bit. So what's happening right now is that Tesla recommends charging to no more than 90%. If you have a 310-mile battery, the Aero wheels give you that 10% back. So it's nice to keep them on even if you may not like how they look. So that was one item he mentioned. The second item he mentioned I thought was kind of interesting is that he got an update the night that he got the car 3 days ago. And then what was interesting is that when he got home, Unlike his S, the current Model 3s don't allow you to use your Wi-Fi in the house to update the vehicle. So I thought this was kind of interesting, or he thought it was kind of interesting because he has poor cell service in the part of California he lives in the Berkeley Hills. And so basically, he was wondering, he kind of asked the folks at Tesla why it was that he couldn't just use the home Wi-Fi to do his thing. What he did share was if you go by a Tesla service center, the Wi-Fi to the car is readily available, and therefore you can get things done without any issues. The next thing he pointed out was that he really liked the interface between the phone and the car. So now what happens is that you typically end up putting you typically end up putting you have the option of using your credit card key for the car, but your phone, the car knows where the phone is, and as you approach the vehicle, it will immediately open up the doors so you can get in. And so there's an interface between phone and car that's a lot better. In the case of the Model S and X, you have a key fob. If you lose the key fob, you're in trouble because it's $175 to replace it, and you don't have those issues with the Model 3. Other items that popped up that I thought were interesting was the fact that he liked the headroom change much better. He ran into somebody with a new Model S, and he was saying if it weren't for the fact that they're using coil springs rather than the air suspension that they use on the Model S and X, there would be no loss of any transition between the two vehicles. So I'm told, Elon Musk talked about the dual motor offering suspension options that are currently not available, namely the air ride suspension. So a little bit less comfortable. So I think that so I'm kind of fascinated by sort of what's going on suspension wise, in terms of what I was hoping for is with the dual motor. Elon Musk suggested the air suspension allows you to elevate the car almost into the level of an SUV. We sort of covered other items like power to the rear seat. He didn't think it was a big deal. He said that the seats are way more comfortable than the Model S and X, and he found himself wanting to just lounge in the car in the garage and just hang out and read or do whatever rather than just head into his regular chair. So, nice comfort level. As you know, the car is 4 inches narrower and a foot shorter. This gives a little bit tighter turning radius. Another thing we were sort of discussing back and forth is how to manage battery degradation in your use of Supercharger. Tesla had suggested that you didn't want to use the Supercharger more than once a week. And as we discussed, they recommend no more than 90% charging. So I just thought it was kind of interesting because in his case, one of the reasons he got rid of his Model S was he had the lowest battery length. And it turns out, perhaps in California, that the gap between superchargers is about 175 miles. And his mileage had dropped to about 185 miles between charges. So there are several sort of close calls where he barely had enough juice to kind of get where he wanted to with the car. The next thing I wanted to cover, so basically now with 310 miles of range, he's in great shape. And I'm wondering about those splits of superchargers because if you're thinking about getting the 35,000 mile version, you can't, you're kind of in a tough spot because the current spread of superchargers is a pain in the butt for people who have short range on their vehicles. So if you have a 210 mile range, they recommend only 90% fill up of the battery. You barely have enough if you have the radio or the heater on or air conditioning to get between superchargers. So another reason why the larger battery is probably in your best interest. Other than that, in general, he's saying he's extremely happy with the car. One other sort of note that he reviewed was the fact that, there's some software issues that are not worked out yet. Tesla explained that in the first 80 miles, the cameras have to calibrate, so many of the features of the autopilot are unavailable. He did review the fact that on the stock, you do have the ability to initial press, sort of releases different functions, like staying in your lane, as well as sort of other activities. So I was intrigued because I didn't know about the first 80 miles that you can't use many of the autopilot features. Um, he particularly was looking for the safety elements of, lane maintenance, etc. For those of you who don't know about this, it'll be fun to see notes underneath this dialogue focused on the fact that um, you can use an orange between your foot and the car, or your leg and the steering wheel, as a way to not have to put your hands on the wheel, but be able to maintain control of the car, as a sort of sidebar trick that those of you with Model X and S's might already know about, but I just thought that was kind of a good idea. I typically sort of stick on topic only, but I've just had a whole bunch of exposure to folks who work on cell phones and security. And my closeout general comments today focus on some security items you might want to consider. One is make sure you put a passcode on your phone, because if someone spoofs your phone, they still have to use the password or figure it out to get in. So that slows down issues in that regard. Number two is while your phone is charging, it gets kind of hot. So doing heavy power usage like 3D games while that phone is in operation can be sort of damaging to the battery and phone, because all that heat affects the soldering that put the phone together to begin with. So it might be something to consider. I have to admit today is somewhat Model 3 find out day. The last thing I wanted to note, and I'll have photos of his vehicle available on my site, is that he did choose the black or charcoal gray. Part of the reason he chose it was it didn't require an extra $1,000 for that color, but I wanted to note that I really have argued against the black color car because it sucks a huge amount of energy in terms of air conditioning the car to get rid of all that heat. And so it's about a 20% battery drain to have a black vehicle versus colors that might be in the middle of the range. So the gap between a white and a black car is actually a 20% difference in energy consumption. So it might be something to consider for those of you who are figuring out what color to choose, because it is a headache, but I think it's worth going ahead and picking a color that's not black, even though it's an extra $1,000, because you start to get into range anxiety driven by how much battery life is consumed cooling the vehicle off between, when you have a black car. The final thing that I'm going to dive into a little bit here, but going to really carry as a theme this week, I'm blowing for me, and the reason I realized is that normal 10 years, you have a huge problem related to the fact that to develop and to have to just deal with electric, both. Then there's a huge that popped up that had large supply chains, moving parts, but they maintain their relationship with supply chain are in a very tough position, because as they make the transition, they can because parts that were delivering previously to that axe manufacturer are no longer needed. So there's a huge issue with large amounts of job loss to move to electric. Won't be a big deal as we enter the next couple of years, 3 years, but as we get into 5 to 7 to 10 years out, There's a huge amount of cost problems that people are experiencing. And then you add on to the fact that there's a whole bunch of folks that are losing their jobs in the process. Now, I have to admit I'm in a tight spot on my show today because usually we go about 20 minutes. Unfortunately, somehow I've managed to have the battery phone plugged in and ready to go and have had it there for a couple of hours, but it's given me no juice and I'm down to 4%. So I think, for the questions you guys have, I think I'll go ahead and take them online. I consider it a Pyrrhic victory, the fact that we're now able to go landscape, portrait rather than landscape, so that we can get the side-to-side view, which I think is much better. Um, Look forward to any and all comments. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Tschüss, German. Au revoir, French. Lehitraot, Hebrew. Wak Goodman, Jamaican. Um, Thank you again for taking time out. And again, look forward to your questions and I will field them. But unfortunately, I'm down to 3% right now and I don't want to go bye-bye without my assistance. And I will say, it's amazing the weird things that end up popping up being a problem that shouldn't be, as you're sort of getting it right in the video. Please look us up on Patreon. We could definitely use your support. Those of you who are on Patreon with us, greatly appreciated. Again, looking forward to any and all comments, and have a great day. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week at 12 p.m. Eastern.